Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Okay, I feel like it's getting to the time of year where I like to have a lot of grab-and-go snacks, but I don't want them to be like super bad for me snack. I mean, I want them to be, but I don't need them to be super bad for me.
Well, first
snacks,
of all,
right?
you said it's getting to be that time of the year. Is it ever not that time of year
Well,
for grab-and-go
I just
snacks?
mean these ones are eaten outside.
You're
I
talking about
emphasize
walking
the go.
snacks. You're talking about walking snacks.
Walking snacks. Yes,
Okay,
I'm talking
gotcha,
on the go more.
Porta snacks, sure.
Yeah. So walking snacks. I like that because car snacks I feel like could be a little bit different than walking snacks. Okay, so it's a time of year where we're outside a lot and you just sometimes need to come in for a snack, but you need to go right back outside. So I need a good walking snack. And I'm curious on what your all's walking snacks are. And I feel like this is something important for all of our listeners who are also outdoorsy people, and they may need a new inspiration for walking snacks.
Creme brulee.
Yes.
Listen, I don't have time for your sass today.
That's my go-to, Brett. Every time.
Creme brulee. Flame it up.
With a cloth napkin.
I'll tell you my current obsession, if that's helpful for you to inspire you towards your walking snack. I cut off a piece of a block of Parmesan cheese, just like a little
European of you,
cubey Parmesan cheese, because it's like, it doesn't fall apart. It's real solid. And I grab usually like a clementine or an apple. It's like a little charcuterie board in my hand, and I have a couple crackers if we have crackers on hand, and I can fit it all usually in one hand, and then I have a hand free to open doors and stuff like that. So that's my current walking snack go-to.
I am not a walking snacker.
Well, listen, good for you and being a person who takes time to...
No, I mean, it's not a judgment thing. I think it's an inflexibility issue of mine.
As a pregnant lady, I have snacks. I have snacks everywhere currently.
As you should.
So I'm trying to think what would be my walking snack. Well, you take like the little cutie oranges and you just eat them as you go, and then you can just toss the pill wherever. You don't have to worry about your trash that way.
That's awesome.
No, actually, I don't know.
The other one I like that may be kind of fringe, I don't know, maybe not, is the fake crab, as we call it, right? It's the
imitation
crab. Yeah, the imitation crab legs, right?
Yeah.
They're good protein. There's not a ton of like sugar or fat and everything in them.
Well, there's a lot of sugar in there. Have you ever looked at the carbs in imitation crab? It's amazing.
To like a granola bar is what I'm talking about.
Don't comment, Ray.
Yeah, no.
So that's my other walking snack, because I need like something to keep me satiated.
I don't know about seafood as a walking snack. That surprises me. And this is coming from someone that likes gas station food. That surprises me as a walking porta snack.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. I mean, I love it. I love your style. I do. I like your style. I was thinking,
beef sticks, like the little meat sticks.
Yeah.
Not as, I mean,
it's
it could be a Slim Jim.
Meat stick.
My original walking snack, which is, if I'm like walking in the woods for an extended period of time, like it can't be like a chocolate candy bar that I love. Back before you had all the protein or complete meal bars and all that fanciness, it was always a payday, because they are so stable, even under heat and time.
They don't melt.
We all carried paydays because they stuck together under abuse in a backpack or a rail pack, and they were just as good being crushed under heat and cold. They were so consistent. It was a payday candy bar. Now, if
that's
I was
real
working,
talk right there.
I mean that take it to the bank. They're cheaper than like the really
literally
expensive.
Take your payday.
Yes, to the bank. Take that payday to the bank. Very nice.
Yeah.
But if I was on the farm, my walking snack always was one thing, because I could sit in the dashboard of the truck close. Vienna sausages.
Oh man.
Or Viennes for those aficionados. For the real people, Viennes. Vienna sausages. If I grew up with those, and my accompaniment to that would have been just a sleeve of crackers. A sleeve of crackers will do it's perfect ratio.
Or like, what do you guys call them? Nabs? Do you call them nabs?
Oh yeah.
Right, because some people don't know like what
you're
talking
type
about.
Stuff.
Yeah, like where they're the like peanut butter crackers or like
pack of peanut butter crackers.
Yeah, those.
That's our fishing snack.
Cheddar.
That's a fishing snack. Ray, you got me thinking though. Now I'm thinking like diaper bag and the stuff you carry in. Certain crackers do not do well. Nutri-Grain bars do not do well in a
They
bag.
smash up.
They smash.
There's a particular brand
The
of granola
Crunch
bar
Everywhere
that just
bars, they
falls
do not work well.
apart. You know, you got to have something that holds up, right, for your
You
walking
do,
snack.
and that's a prerequisite. That's the main thing for me is I don't like to eat stuff mushy that's not supposed to be so. Creme brulee aside, Brett, whatever. But yeah, payday candy bars. It's an OG. It's the real OG.
So before we jump into what we're going to talk about, I just need to circle back
Has
to
nothing to do with
Alexis
what we're-
eating imitation crab meat. Is that something that
I'm glad you're circling back.
Are
Did
you
you
walking
see
with, like,
that
this-
somewhere, or did you just?
I grew
you
up.
just
My mom bought it. I grew up eating that.
In a portable sense,
like just as like how some people eat beef jerky.
It's in stick form, right? Because
Yeah,
they sell it
there's
for like
like a
sushi.
flake. Yeah, there's like a flake form too. That's like still like big like chunks.
maybe that's what
And so
I'm
this is
thinking of.
another
the flake
type
one.
of fish that is made to look like it's crab meat.
right.
I
And
have
it's cooked,
literally
obviously.
never heard of someone just raw dogging that.
I mean, I love the stuff. Don't get me wrong, but we
I
put
know,
it in a
it's-
different kind of
It's
arena.
good protein.
I'm not
It is, it's
criticizing.
very
I
good.
mean,
I love
it
it.
sounds like you're criticizing.
I love it because it's very rare that you hear something that you've just never heard
Is
before.
incongruent with
Like a
your
new.
perceptions of
My
reality.
mom bought it when growing up because she had we
Sure.
grew up on a farm. She needed walking snacks, and so she like wanted high protein stuff, and
That makes
was
me curious to our audience. Drop in a comment, email us,
Yeah.
let us know if that's
Yeah.
something else that you do. 'Cause,
Brett,
I mean,
you thought
I
you
ate
were
plenty of weird
fringe.
things and
You're not
strange
fringe,
things.
Brett.
and-
No.
What's that?
I said you're not fringe. I thought you were going to be the fringe in the conversation. You are not even
Oh
towards
He
the
was like,
edge.
Alexis
I
blew
eat
me off the
sour-
map.
Yes, you did get blown off of the chart.
Just
The XY axis
eating
has been
Luke's
redefined.
imitation crab meat
Yes.
on the go.
Yeah. I feel much better about my gas station
I
sushi
didn't even
now. I
realize
mean,
that it was like something in some sort of sushis and like that kinds of things until
Yeah.
I was much older. Like I didn't know
Yeah.
that it was in other things. Like that's the way it
You
came.
just thought it
That's
came like in a
that
stick
is so
form, and you
awesome.
just
or the flakes, or the
Yeah.
like quote unquote. Like,
I imagine
little
just
nuggets.
Alexis pulling imitation crab meat out of her pocket
I
now
would
in the
love.
summer
I
just
would
eating
love
it.
to be next to you and like you just be
I
like,
don't know if you would.
It's
I don't know if
I
you would.
keep it in the cheese drawer so I can grab everything with one fell swoop.
yeah,
Wow.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
All
like
right.
to have all your snacks as if they were extruded from some.
Yes.
You know,
Like peanut butter
I really-
products,
I love that
building
so
blocks of health.
so much.
I like the word extruded there, Brett. Nicely
Yeah.
played.
Well, drop us a comment with your walking snack of choice, and or if you've ever just bought a pack of imitation crab to eat on the go. So,
Wow.
it's ironic that you say extruded in that shape because my other favorite thing that's my car snack is at the grocery store the like
I'm scared.
cans that pop, easy pop cans
Like
of
Vienna
artichoke
sausages.
hearts.
Oh.
Eat those in or not
Is that-
artichoke
now,
hearts.
does
I'm sorry,
that go
heart
back
of
to childhood,
palm.
or is that a
Heart
more
of
recent?
palm, specifically heart of palm. They're the long, tall.
That is so just
Yeah, my mom and I used to do it. So Dad and I would eat Vienna sausages in the car. Like we'd get like one and share it in after we did grocery
Like one
shopping.
Vienna sausage
As
or
a child,
can of Vienna sausage?
just one. We'd just
One
the rest
can
we'd
was
dump
good for
out.
six trips to the grocery.
Yes.
And Mom
Oh,
and
man.
I would occasionally share the heart of palm one. So also in that round.
Oh my
launch.
goodness!
Alexis is just trying to bring it back to horticulture from Vienna sausage.
I have known
people.
Alexis for a long time, and this has genuinely shocked
New
me.
info. This is breaking info, people.
This is
You're hearing
awesome.
as we're
I love
hearing
it. I absolutely love it.
Jessica's like, this is pretty standard.
And the pregnant lady is super impressed. I can tell by the
I
look on your
am.
face,
I
Jessica.
am.
for
Like,
those
do I need to
watching.
go
Yeah.
buy some heart
do
of
I
palm?
need this?
The
And
answer
I'm
is
like,
yes.
do I need to eat a Vienna sausage right now?
You probably
You
do.
need to get
It's
the
good
boys
about
started
that.
on some imitation crab meat so they can
they would
help
probably
us
love
Their
spread this
version
tradition.
of Vienna sausage. It's
They would probably love that.
Yeah,
what
I'm
we're
so
here
shook. I
today
can't
for.
even possibly think of a segue right
No
now.
recovery.
Can't even think
no
of like what
recovery.
we're supposed to be talking about.
We are talking about, if you've looked at the title of the show, we are talking about pruning today because we know it's the time of year where a lot of those questions come up. When do I do something? How do I do it? Why do I even need to bother pruning? Do you even need to bother pruning? And all that jazz. And especially after periods of, cold weather, we start, and things that start to bud out, we start to see possible damage and other kinds of situations. So we thought pruning would be something valuable for you all.
Very timely topic.
Are we still talking? I guess it's semi. When this show airs, it'll not exactly dormant pruning here in central Kentucky and Kentucky. Depending on which zone you're in, it still may be dormant pruning. But for us, I guess things are starting to grow, but it's still not a bad time for a lot of things, is it? To go ahead and prune that. I mean, we're in a sort of a transition stage now.
Yeah.
You're hearing this probably mid-April-ish.
Yeah, things are starting to really leaf out.
How do you, just really quick, how would you define dormant versus not dormant?
I have deformed a lot of plants.
How would you deform
properly?
Through my pruning of fruit trees over the years, but when buds
I'm still recovering
from the crab.
Imitation crab and artichoke heart.
It's a hard pull back from that. It was the abyss, the edge of the abyss.
How would you define, or if I go out and look at a plant, how do I tell if it's dormant or not?
Generally, I mean, just from a practical field standpoint, is when things haven't leafed out, buds are tight cluster. Now, if you're talking about dormant fruit tree pruning, it's a little different because the buds go through all these stages, right? But for the most part, when no leaves and buds are still tight cluster, that to me is dormant pruning. And that'll come into play later on in our discussion today when we talk about things like, if we're pruning for structure versus flowering, it becomes a bigger discussion in some cases. So
if you're in the kind of general interest in these types of things, I think it's easier to sort of say, just sort of starts leafing out, or it's before it leafed out. But in the actual world of managing this stuff, there's all these different stages of where the buds are. Even leaf buds.
It's gradients. Leaf buds are the same.
Have a swelling. You can have a slight opening, and different stages along that path.
And a lot of times we talk about pruning in in two different ways. There's lots of ways to talk about pruning depending on the plant. But we talk about the reasons, first of all, why we're pruning. But in the case of trees, I mean, you may talk about structural changes, even though they've started to leaf out, you don't have full leaf out, and you need to make some structural changes to an oak tree that's by your house, for instance. It's still a great time to go ahead and prune like oaks and maples, even though they're starting to leaf out and don't have full leaf load, because your biggest concern in that situation would be the weight of the limb and being able to see the structure of the tree. That's why I like to dormant prune. If I have to do any kind of, I try not to prune those things, but if you have to and make pruning cuts, I mean, that's just some reasons why it's still a good time to do that, even though the leaf out is occurring, is you can still see into the structure of the tree, and that's a good thing. It's better when there's no leaves on there because you can get an overall better sense of the tree and what you need to do. But the weight is still not on the limbs, and that's a very good thing, because when we're talking about bigger plants, that weight becomes a huge issue. So that's considerations when we're thinking about things like trees.
I think also, just to add to it, it's always a good time to prune, like, because we'll talk through and say, like, we'll share certain plants, that it is a good time or it's not a good time. But we've recently had a lot of storms come through, so it's a good time to prune anytime when you have storm damage that has occurred. It's better to take that off and get a good, nice pruning cut on a tree than letting it hang there and potentially cause more damage or tear into that bark by leaving it there. So that's like my one thing I always tell people, like, when they asking when to prune, and it's like, well, it's not, they know it's not a good time to prune certain things, but if you have any damage or dead wood or something like that,
that's the 3 Ds, right?
That's
dead,
like
disease, damage. Those are anytime.
Go for it.
That's the 3D rule. I use that over and over again. And that's for shrubs as well as trees. That's a great point, Jessica, is any time of the year for those things. And I also point out, as far as any time of the year when you're talking about landscape, trees especially, but also for two different things. And that's water sprouts, which are up in the tree, these pencil-like growth that can accumulate if limbs go below a certain angle, and you get bunches of those. For water sprouts up in a plant, or suckers coming out around the roots, they fall into that category too when I'm talking to folks. So anything dead, disease, or damage, and then water sprouts and suckers, that's sort of at any time of the year, because you're working towards overall plant health with those things. With water sprouts and suckers, they don't add a lot to the plant. In some cases, they can detract from the plant, but also the dead, disease, dying stuff either poses a a health hazard to you, not just the plant in the case of dead wood, but also if it's diseased or, crossover branches that are creating wounds and stuff any time of the year. So that's a great place to start, because the overall goal, right, is the longevity of the plant, the health of the plant. And so you have to take those things into account in the bigger picture. Those are good to do anytime during the year. That's
Yeah,
a good
and
point, Jessica.
I would say too that the optimal window is the optimal window, not because it's the only time of year that you can prune, and if you do it any other time, the thing's going to die.
Yeah.
It's just because that's the least stressful time to do that to the plant. It's the
Yeah.
most optimal. So imagine,
Yes.
me giving you a task after you've worked a full day, and then you had to take care of the kids, and you did the dishes, and you're stressed out. That's not the optimal time
Mhm.
for me to ask you to do something for me. Whereas if I could come in right at the beginning of your day when you're fresh, good night's sleep, and I ask you to do something, I'm likely to have a better result. It's the same way if you can
Mhm.
prune it just before bud break
Mm-hmm.
on a
Yeah.
tree. What
Dormancy.
that what that does is, physiologically, as you think about it, just as before dormancy ends, you're taking and you're removing that thing, and then the whole tree comes back to life, so to speak. It pushes out all its new leaves. It doesn't put a lot of new energy into that branch. It puts the energy into the other branches. There's a lot of nutrients and water and other things flowing. It's able to heal quickly. So that's why, for instance, you wouldn't want to necessarily prune it right before winter starts, right before it
Mhm.
becomes dormant, because now you have this open wound that's just going to sit there through all of winter. It's going to get wet. It's going to get cold and all these other things. That's the reasoning. But as Ray and Jessica have said, it's if you're not going to do a ton of pruning, any time of year is kind of okay on something that's pretty robust and strong.
Yeah.
But it's really just about trying to optimize the best time of year to not stress the plant out.
Yeah, a lot of that, what you just mentioned, Brett, to me is like sugar content. That's a weird angle at coming at that. But when things start to go dormant and the sugar content comes up in the tree, we call that hardening off. And when it has high sugar content, it has greater resistance to freezing. It's like plant antifreeze. And one of the things you don't want to do after mid to late summer in a lot of plants, like boxwoods and maples and things like that, you don't want to do that late season pruning, because then you cause a reaction in the plant that causes a flush of new growth, and that new growth is not going to harden off before winter. And we see that as the most common scenario. And I'm sure, Jessica, you as being in a county office, you get that question all the time. People have pruned their boxwoods and then they get this new growth and they get 16 inches of dead area the next spring. You just know what they did. They pruned late
Right.
summer, got that new growth. And that's what Brett's talking about, is that that proper time when the plant can heal the quickest, or compartmentalize the pruning cut the quickest. There's a certain timing factor in there that's ideal. Now we do some things all throughout the year, but ideally it's during that time that Brett just mentioned for a lot of different plants, right? That's a good rule of thumb, and it all has to do with the plant hardening off, starting that process in mid to late summer, going into winter when it's mostly dormant and very low meristematic like activity at growing points of the tree. You make the pruning cut, the tree doesn't know the difference, and then it calluses or compartmentalizes that injury, that pruning cut, very well.
So I'm front loading my commentary because after this, everybody else knows way more than me. So I think we summarized that for trees, most kind of traditional landscape trees, typically you would want to think about trying, if you can, trying to prune in basically late winter, early spring. In Kentucky, that's typically in like February and
Yeah.
March is when a lot of
Yep.
that dormancy transition starts to happen.
You're doing same with fruit trees too.
Yep.
If you've got a couple fruit trees, you'll start seeing that happen.
Yeah,
Cool.
fruit trees are that's a good example, and we could even have a separate show just on pruning of
Yeah.
fruit trees. But yeah, that's a good point, Alexis, on the fruit trees.
What
You prune
about
those when they're dormant.
sorry, this just hit me, and probably most of our listeners this does not apply to, but maybe you're plant nerds and you just like to know things. Vineyards, grapes. When are they pruning grapes? I
A
always
dormant period also.
dormant
Similar,
period also.
similar
Okay,
time.
I thought
Yeah,
so, but
February,
then I was
March.
like,
Grape pruning is really interesting. We had a
they
discussion yesterday at Master Gardeners. If you prune grapes properly, I mean, they look like they
they
have
flush
been
like crazy.
butchered.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like there's
but
there's like nothing left when they
Well,
prune
Yeah.
them, it looks like.
with
Yeah.
grapes, it's a little different. Well, it's not greatly different. Because no wood that you see in very early winter is going to bear fruit. It's only on the new flushes, and that's how you manage like things like
Right.
grapes, which are a little bit specialized, but also super cool the way you manage those.
Yeah.
And part of the strategy is you don't want to have too many shoots because you
Yeah.
want the grapes that are on the shoots there to get as many the right amount of nutrients as possible.
Yeah.
But you want enough shoots that you get a good yield. So there's
Quality over
In
quantity kind of
Kentucky,
issue.
that's a huge problem with grapes. Our soils are so good for the most part. They're almost too good as far as the nutrient profile
Yeah.
goes, and we have too much leaf cover in some cases, or too much vigor is the right word I'm looking for, and it's really hard to balance that fruit load versus vigor. So yeah,
there's all kinds of strategies with grape training and pruning, and we should
Yeah.
definitely try to get Jeff.
Yeah.
That'd be a great
Jeff Wheeler.
topic.
Shout out Jeff Wheeler. He works with UK Hort Culture. We get South Farm. Big grape nerd. Big pruning nerd.
Yeah, because
He can answer all the questions.
You start to talk about fruit and you get specialized, and we'll muddy the water quick. But it's also a great topic. I don't know why we haven't thought about that before, but that's a
Not to
really
take us
good one.
off topic. It dawned on me.
No, that's it.
Yeah,
Because
that's a
I
great
was thinking about
question.
that too, is because when Ray mentioned just about pruning apples, like we could do a whole episode on just like fruit pruning, because like there's different considerations with like how old your apple tree is,
Yeah.
right? Like if you have new little baby apple trees, you're gonna wait a little longer to prune those. And I know. I waited as long as I could to prune, versus like older established trees, and there's all sorts of things that go into
And fruit trees, we
Fruit's
talk
a
about
different
the
ballgame.
difference. To do the difference between training, which is the first 3 years, versus pruning, which takes place year 4 on. So a completely different kind of thing. When you're setting things like scaffold limbs, if you're talking about semi-dwarf, or now everything's high density orchards if you're commercial in Kentucky, which is a completely different pruning system. But the basic things that Brett started us off with, as far as timing, that still applies in those situations where you're trying to make pruning cuts, not only when the tree is going to heal the best, but also it also involves diseases, doesn't it? Because if you do late season pruning as a homeowner, especially that may not have cover sprays of fungicides and bactericides, you also increase the risk of diseases if you prune later in the year. That's not to say in some situations, we already said, that's fine in some situations where you have damaged wood or whatever. But if you prune during the dormant period, it also decreases the likelihood of spreading diseases. And that's a big one too for homeowners.
Think about a plan for cleaning and sanitizing your tools between sessions. If you know that a tree has disease, you want to sanitize after you use the tools in that place. There's a whole thing there about not spreading disease. So we've kind of gone down a more technical, which is fine because we are
Hort
dorks.
Culture.
Plant nerds.
Hort Culture. But I think so. One of the things that has happened to me is that my wife and gardening partner, who was featured on a previous podcast, has planted a bunch of perennial flower things, and I need to know when to prune those. So guide me, please.
Things that flower, and they're
Are they
perennials,
I
which are
guess they
woody
should start off with
things.
their herbaceous or
woody.
My mind
both.
immediately went
Maybe we assume both.
herbaceous.
All of those.
So maybe start with herbaceous. What are your thoughts
Herbaceous
on that?
meaning
they don't get woody growth, so they're perennial. They come back every year, but they're not going to have like woody stems.
Like they die all the way back to the ground.
Usually, yeah.
Okay.
Brett loaded up by letting us know, I think immediately, didn't you, Brett, that blooms are important in this scenario, right?
Blooms are important.
Blooms are important. Yeah. Which changes the discussion a little bit. It really does.
So you're saying if I prune one way, I won't get flowers, and if I prune another way, I will?
In a lot of cases, yes. And I did that to myself last year. But after you guys talk about this, I'll tell you the boneheaded thing I did last year.
Your timing, right? As we've mentioned a bunch already, timing is a big part of it.
Timing based on bloom. And you were talking to us a little bit before we got started on the show, Jessica, about that a little bit as far as timing goes, weren't you?
Yeah, we were kind of talking about the things that help us remember when to prune certain plants because it can get confusing out there. But
Mhm.
like, what is it? If they flower before the end of June, when do we prune those? If they flower before, you prune them right
Right
Yes.
after,
afterwards.
right.
Yeah.
The
They're
early bloomer,
walking
and
wood.
in Kentucky, we call those early bloomers. If it's
Yep.
around June, beginning of June, we kind of lump those into the. Now, that's not going to be true of other areas of the country, but for Kentucky, our golden rule is the beginning of June. We call those early bloomers. And you said when, Jessica, if they're early bloomers?
You prune them right after
Yes.
you're finished blooming.
And so if you're not in Kentucky or in a similar zone, the type of plant might help you figure out like, okay,
Right.
when does it bloom for me? And so you're thinking like lilacs, forsythia,
Yeah.
smoke bush, all those things that are, flower earlier in the season. Though you're gonna prune them right after bloom. So whether that's June or if you're in the mountains of Colorado, that could be July.
Which one is Weigela? Was that how you say it?
Wagelia.
Yep, that one.
Yeah, that's how I say it.
I don't speak French.
Is that how?
You don't.
This
You
is
don't.
Latin.
Just
Thank you very
teasing.
much. I say Wagelia. What do you guys say?
That's say Wagelia. Yeah.
Okay,
I do not say that,
I've heard
and
it
I'm
both
not gonna
ways.
even attempt
Waglia
to
and
say
Wagelia.
my
Latin is
version.
a dead language.
Does Latin have a
so-
G, like a J sound in it? You know who studied Latin? Emily
Who?
Spencer, former podcast guest. She also
Mm.
said that she laughed at my Corgito ergo s joke. She's in the 1%.
She
So
got it.
she'll have to let us know. But is that in the blooms before June category?
I forget with that one. It's in there,
Yes,
and I
we
looked
do.
that one
Yeah.
up.
yeah,
Yeah.
It
It's
blooms
an
like
early bloomer. It's right on the fringe of early
it's
bloomers.
right on the fringe. Yep.
So you're saying
Snowball bush, right? Is that one already?
Viburnum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
if I
talked
got
about
that
that.
thing and I wanted, I don't know why I said it like that. If I got that thing, that kind of just came out.
that thing.
Got that thing. If I'm out walking around my garden with a handful of imitation crab meat and I'm looking at
Yes.
my what is it? Wagelia?
Wagelia.
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 Hydrangeas. Yeah.
And it's a little overgrown from where I would prefer it to be, but I would like to have flowers this year. I should wait until it blooms, drops the flowers, and then prune. Is
Which
that correct?
kind of makes sense. I mean, it's the answer is sort of in the timing because the early bloomers said the buds are there when? Well, they're there early in the year. And if you prune them dormant, you're pruning what? You're pruning the flower buds.
Right.
So that's why that rule works so well is you have to wait until after because if you prune before, like I did last year on my angel wing lilacs, I wasn't thinking. And my wife got very upset that they didn't bloom, but I did not tell her that I pruned all the blooms off not thinking. I've got French lilacs and then the white lilacs.
Wait, so
And
you're
it was my
telling
fault.
me you pruned a lilac, one
I
of these
pruned it.
early flowering things, and it did
Yes.
not die.
No, it didn't. But see, that was my point. It was overgrown. My objectives were not the flowers. That's my wife's primary directive. Not to quote some Star Trek. That's her prime directive is flowering. Yes, indeed, Brett. But my reasoning for pruning that dormant was I was more concerned about the overgrown nature of that. I hadn't pruned it in a while, so that's why I went ahead and did it, knowing that for the overall health of the plant it was not going to impact that. And it was better done during dormant stage, but I was not going to get blooms that year. But did I fess up to that? It was me? No, I did not fess up to that. And Jennifer hopefully will never listen to this
This is
episode.
making stuff make sense because I hear I've watched videos and stuff, and this is on. Yeah, I'm learning along with our listeners here, but hearing people say this stuff is really kind of out of hand or overgrown. We need to cut it back. And yes, we're going to sacrifice some blooms this year for the sake of the overall structure of the plant in future years. And that's so is that an example? I've heard of like the idea of blooming on or flowering on old wood versus new wood. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So old
Yeah, a
wood.
little bit.
Yeah, it means like pretty literally like it's flowering on the last year's wood. And then new wood is going to be on the new growth. And so it took me like I don't know. It doesn't seem right that it took me a while to really figure this out when you think about like the life cycle of plants, right? But I like to put things in an actual calendar when my brain thinks about it. And so, so if you take a lilac as an example, lilacs are, historically a spring bloomer. And so, if the blooms that it's going to make in spring of 2025, the buds were created in summer and fall of 2024. And so I'm going to prune it in, early summer, late spring, early summer 2024. And then it gives it all summer and fall and winter to create this bud stage. And then it's going to bloom again. And then I'm going to prune it. And then it starts over. Versus new wood, you are going to prune it in the, quote unquote, dormant stage because you want a flush of new growth because that's where the buds form. So the more new growth you have, assuming that the plant is healthy, has good roots, gets the water, blah, blah, blah. In a perfect situation, the more new growth you have, the more flowers you have.
Right.
And so then you prune off all that old dead stuff. And like hydrangeas are like historically the hardest thing.
Yes.
I and Jessica both always have to look up which one is which.
The macrophyllias, the old-fashioned ones.
Yeah, people will send us pictures and they'll be like, hey, when do I prune this hydrangea? Number one, they only send you a picture when it's completely dormant and all you see are like the hanging flowers that are brown.
You can't, you're like,
I
how do I identify this?
Or maybe it's an arborescence genus. But the reason why it matters so much versus a lilac, for the most part, a lilac is a lilac is a lilac, is because hydrangeas, there are new wood bloomers, there are old wood bloomers, and then there's newer varieties that will do both. So you might get multiple blooms.
Yeah, so you could chop them up and you're still going to get,
right.
stuff
or
from
you
them.
could not chop them up one year if you have the space for it and you get 2 cycles of blooms.
The fact that through breeding, it's a plant that I would not have considered personally for myself, not the old-fashioned type hydrangeas because there was so much winter kill, you didn't get a consistent bloom every year. But that was an industry that completely changed through breeding when they patented all of these cultivars and varieties that were so-called ever blooming. They bloom on new wood. I mean, when our PG hydrangeas at the office, they get to be about 6 foot tall, they get a little overgrown. What do? They're a healthy plant. I'll take them down to 18 inches in the winter, and then everybody kind of freaks out as they drive by and they come in. They're like, what did you do with your hydrangeas? They're beautiful. I'm like, about every 3 or 4 years, I cut those down to 18 to 20 inches, and then they flush back, and because they're ever blooming. And they're so much easier to take care of. But the fact that plant, ever blooming hydrangeas, completely changed that industry and brought back hydrangeas.
And it's hard for people who maybe move to a new house and there's already established hydrangeas there, and then they purchase these new ever blooming ones, right? So they're gonna try to prune everything the same, and then they're suddenly like, hey, when we moved here, these bloomed great. And now they're not blooming. Do I need to fertilize them? Do I need this? Do I need that? And then you have to try to find out okay, what type of hydrangea do you was already there. And it could be just something as simple as, you might be accidentally pruning off all your buds.
Yeah.
So,
and it is confusing. Yeah.
I always have to revisit this every year because as someone who grows flowers for cuts, right? You're cutting off the bloom. So it's does that matter? And so for lilacs, as an example, right, you are already going to prune them after they bloom. So I go ahead and do my pruning as part of that cutting process. And that's kind of how I cut. So I might leave some blooms just because that's for the overall health of the plant, right? So that's part of that kind of thought process.
And here, we're talking about lilacs, maybe a good spot to talk about multi-stemmed shrubs. And lilac is a great example. A pruning strategy that has worked so well for me over the years, and you'll see this documented in a lot of information at the University of Kentucky. But when you have shrubs like Rose of Sharon or lilac, any of those, talking about general plant health, we get a lot of questions how to prune those, because so many times I go out on a site visit and I see that people are heading those back. They're just making top cuts to bring the overall size down. When on multi-leadered shrubs like that, it's so much better to do a thinning cut, because an important concept in pruning, very important concept, is heading back and thinning. Heading back is when you shorten a branch partially. Thinning is when you take a branch all the way down to the ground, in this case of lilacs, or back to a trunk. Now, when we're talking about lilacs, about every 3 years, I have a brand new plant, actually 4 years, meaning that any wood that's older than 3 years old, going into 4 years, I go in at the top of the ground and I cut that out because it becomes unthrifty. Um, and that is a very important concept in pruning, and it's important in especially these multi-leadered shrubs that we're talking about. Not talking about blooms, no offense, Annie, Brett's wife, but there you're just taking the tips off, and that's not really getting to the heart of the matter on these multi-leadered shrubs. You're actually going and you're thinning those down, taking off old wood to the ground, and that's how you can maintain these like gorgeous bloom loads. So just
To
kind
be
of keep that in
fair,
mind.
I
To be
also
fair,
I also enjoy flowers
you do.
too.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Good.
just had to sort of set it up as a little bit of
Yeah,
a
you had to throw that out there.
scenario, a little bit of a bit. Yeah, I think if I had one extremely petty thing that I could like implement, it would be that you have to get trained and get a license in order to buy a hedge trimmer.
Yeah.
Because the number of
Yes.
people who use a hedge trimmer
Yeah.
to prune
Yeah.
things that is not appropriate
Right.
for, I mean, and I would almost go to the point of like, I understand if you're a professional and you got to move on and you're trimming certain things. I would never use a head trimmer to trim anything. I would go and snip every little thing myself, and it gives me a little more control. I also enjoy the process, but
Hmm.
that's
Obviously.
yeah.
Go
Brett,
on, Ty Guy.
Alexis, you guys that are on campus, do you? And I always ask people this, like, and I pick on taxus because when you shear taxus, yeah, you can keep it nice and uniform, but that's a kind of a heading back cut and it makes everything real thick and bushy and sunlight can't get in. But is there any good examples of like a taxus that is pruned the way you're talking about, Brett, where you're actually maintaining more of a natural growth habit of that? I'm always looking for good examples of those because it's amazing how different a plant that is
I
pruned two
want
different ways look.
to do that. I have two
I would love to
giant
do that.
ones at
Yeah.
my house that are like
Yeah.
overgrown, and I
Mhm.
really
It
want
takes a
to
long
prune
time.
them.
Mhm.
I've
Yeah.
seen two sets of really beautiful ones that are incredibly old, and someone went in and hacked them up appropriately, in where they're almost like trees. I don't know. They're
Yes.
very artistic. And Jessica's been and I have like oohed and awed over one set together,
Mhm.
and they're at Udell,
Oh,
Mhm.
I need to go there
Botanical
then.
Garden, and then that's YEW Udell because they're
Nice.
known for
Get
their
it?
U's.
Taxes.
Their
Yeah.
The
taxes.
common name of Texas.
And then the other one is at I just blanked on the name. It's a venue, but it's also a distillery, and they do rum. No, they do gin. What's that place called?
What city
The
is it in?
distillery that does gin here in Kentucky. I guess it's kind of Frankfurt, but I think it's technically not Frankfurt.
Like a
You guys are
I
Uh,
forget
gonna
this.
be mad when
it's
you
not
Well,
realize
Castle, not
Castle
Castle
and
and
Key.
Key. Is
Castle
it
and
Castle
Key.
and
okay.
Key?
Castle
Yeah.
and Key
They have a good example of that.
has a sunken garden that
Mhm.
has some really beautiful old yews that John Karloftis pruned up.
That's I see yews that are pruned like that. Sometimes I even I've heard people refer to that as cloud pruning or natural pruning.
Mm-hmm.
But yews look really different when you prune them naturally.
Junipers.
And yeah,
Yeah.
junipers really do. Yeah,
Mm.
which
Yeah.
we
So,
haven't even talked about
and
evergreens yet.
just in case anyone out there is like, what the heck? You said heading back, you said thinning, you said
Yeah,
Brett is trying to
break it down
ban
for us, Brett. That's an
Brett's trying to
important
ban
one.
some
Yeah,
hedge trimmers. So like
yeah.
imagine you walk up to this plant that's very, very thick and you want to compact it, you want to remove some of the foliage, you want to in some way, affect it. A heading back, so Alexis sent us a message in our little chat here to say that heading back is cutting just the tip. So it's just removing the tip. And what that's going to do is it's going to make that plant likely produce buds at that cut site, and in some
Mhm.
cases further back. And so it's going to increase the density of the foliage of that particular
Yes,
thing.
and sometimes that's desired, and sometimes people don't think about that's what's
If
going to
the thing
happen.
is
Mhm.
crazy overgrown and you want to create some space in it, and Ray talked about cloud pruning, this idea where you're creating these little puffs, these little clouds of foliage across the plant, but you can see the structure, you can see the branches. that might look like physically reaching in with a pruner back to a branch further in and cutting off an entire branch and removing that. It might be taking and cutting that branch all the way back to the trunk itself. I mean, if we start to move into some of the bonsai techniques and the topiary techniques that you'll see that people use to make these crazy English topiary gardens, and
or like
things
a red twig dogwood is another good example. So you've got lots and lots of stems coming out of the ground, or a crepe myrtle often are like this because they can die back to the ground. So you've got lots and lots of shoots coming out, and there's just too many. It's either too big, it's filling the space, it's too round.
It will overwhelm you if you don't address it.
Right. Or it's not getting enough light in, and you can be having and airflow. And so especially with like dogwoods that get a lot of cankers on them, they need more airflow. So you will go in and cut off those branches all the way to the ground. So you go from having 10 shoots coming out of the ground to 7 shoots coming out of the ground. So
and
that's
the old
that thinning process.
The bark, if you look at like dogwoods are a great example, and lilacs, whatever, you can look at the bark and almost tell the old wood because it's just starts to not look. It starts to look rough. It's cracked. It's just not meant to be there forever. And I've had big stands of lilacs that I'll go up to, and they've not been pruned in years, and literally all the center is dead, and they're wondering why it's not blooming. But then we have the discussion you just mentioned, Alexis, for all those things. And if you can get those kind of 2 golden rules down, number 1 is, when you're pruning, always prune to a living point, which means you're pruning to a growing area, which is a bud or a trunk with a proper cut. And number 2 is just the way that you prune, and that's the thinning and heading back. If you know those 2 principles, prune to a growing cut or a living point, and then those 2 cuts we just mentioned that Brett kind of clarified. If you know those 2 things, 80% of pruning, and you use those principles over and over and over again. Those 2 things in pruning is more than half the battle.
And if you don't know how much to cut back, the good rule of thumb is no more than 1/4. Now, if it's like something really crazy, really overgrown, really lush, you might be able to get away with like 1/3. You can cut back to 1/3. That's like considered a much harder prune. But if you are cautious and maybe new to this, go with 1/4. Overall plant size, take it down by 25%. 30% is going to be, or 35%, whatever. 33% is going to be more what people who have experience doing know a lot more about the plant. We don't even want to talk to Brett on the way he prunes bonsais because it's a totally different
different ball.
That's an episode by itself because those pruning techniques are not the same. Although the understanding of the way plants work, I would venture to say is going to be the same. So it's just taking those principles in a different way.
The more established it is, the longer it's gone since a heavy prune. Means that like it's a little more resilient and robust. I'm talking about regular trees, not bonsai trees. That's true for them too. But like in the case of, I think of the pruning journey as something you're not going to accomplish in 1 year. So while you would love to have a plant that was more compact or that was back this way, do not sacrifice the plant's health just to achieve your aesthetic goals for it. And so, like, for instance, when we moved in, we had 2 dogwoods that were cared for really beautifully for like 50 years. And then in the last 10 years, the person who lived there didn't do anything. And so beautiful trunk lines, like really well sculpted, but the top was horrendous, needed tremendous thinning, all kinds of water chutes and everything else that had caused problems. But I pushed them to about that tipping point between 1/4 and 1/3. And I said, okay, that's it. And I worked on it over the next 10 years almost. And each year I take off a little bit less, but that first year that I took off that 1/3, I didn't touch it again for like 2 years. I let it fully, grow back. I let it, and it did, and they were established, but I'm definitely agree with that of
multiple year process.
Don't push it too far and too fast. And you also get to learn how the tree works. You get to kind of assess its health. And
if you
and that's
prune
a cool
it too
thing
hard and fast, you get a lot of secondary issues, not only possible diseases, slow callousing and healing, but you get a lot of sun scald, especially in like those dogwoods, a lot of sun scald. And you will get the plant, I guess a good way to say it is the plant kind of freaks out and sends signals that, hey, I'm dying. And what does a plant that says, hey, I'm dying do? It produces
sprouts.
lots more growth. So you compound the issue, like Brett said. If you go too far, you will know because the plant will produce a lot of soft, succulent growth, and it actually makes your future pruning processes way harder.
Yeah.
Okay, so
He
I'm
goes,
looking at how much time we have that we've already covered some ground here.
Yeah.
I want to briefly mention as far as tools that you might think about.
Yeah, good.
For me, I can accomplish just about everything that I want to do with this type of pruning with a set of hand pruners. For slightly bigger branches, a set of what's called loppers, which are really just hand pruners with really long handles and beefier blades.
Mhm.
And then I also have a pruning saw for even
Yeah.
bigger branches than that. But if
Pruning
you're
saw is
pruning
really
small
important.
Oh,
stuff, I mean, hand
love a
pruners are
pruning saw.
the thing.
Two types of hand pruners, bypass, which is for what, Brett? That's for the living wood. When you have the curved blade that bypasses the anvil section, it's actually bypasses that. So the bypass is good for living wood.
Yeah, so the bypass is kind of more like a scissors,
Yes,
where they pass
they
by each
literally
other as they
bypass. Yeah.
cut. And then the anvil is more like it's like a knife on a cutting board, where
Yeah.
it chops into the flat
And
surface.
better for like really tough, more dead wood. I don't use anvil pruners very often.
Yeah,
No.
I don't even
I like
know that. I
honestly
don't
didn't
care.
even know the difference until you just told me, and then I was like, oh yeah, I've
Right.
seen those. Like I
Yeah,
only
I
ever
was
used the
thinking the
bypass.
same thing. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you mentioned loppers, Brett, just a tip. I love the new loppers that when you are reading the packaging, they have short handles and you're like, oh, those are like mini loppers.
Yeah.
But then you realize they have a 3x4 magnifier. They have a gear in there.
It's
And
so
those
awesome.
are amazing. If you see those, buy them because they have literally the equivalent force of a lopper 3 times their size, but they're compact, they're easy to get in and prune things like lilacs where it's kind of
Or
confined.
the
I own a pair of those.
ratcheting hand pruners.
Yeah, those are really nice.
Are really great. So like I use snips for most of my stuff because
Oh, yeah.
I'm printing smaller things, but my the pruners that I want that I'm going to ask for Christmas that are larger from our woody stuff are ratcheting just to kind of save your hands.
Yeah, those are really cool.
So that would
And
be
you-
good. And then the 3-point saw is the the arborist saw, the hand saw. They're really inexpensive, but they're specifically the 3-point because they cut on the push in the pool, and your life will be so much better. So if
And they make them in like miniaturized versions that you can like just
folding
hook on your
ones.
love those. That's probably like one of my favorite pruning
We used to
tools.
talk about bow saws in pruning, but you can't use a bow saw in a Rose of Sharon or a lilac or something like that.
No.
So what you have is that little folding. That's my favorite thing in my garage is
Folding
a
3-point,
folding saw. Yeah.
That's
Love
mine
that.
too.
Double cut folder. Yeah.
The one I have is not folding. It has like a sheath.
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
a Velcro sheathed one.
You whip it around like a sword. Mine's more like a switchblade.
Exactly. You can strap it to your leg,
Nice.
which I never
Different
do
street
because I'm
fights,
not but I kind of want to because it makes you look cool,
Samurai versus street punk. I love it. There's a showdown coming.
The other thing I briefly wanted to ask about was, so we talked about early blooming stuff. As far as the late blooming stuff, what's a couple of examples of what those are? And just to make sure I'm understanding, when is it that we could or should prune those?
The late blooming stuff, as far as pruning, that's more of dormant pruning. So it's safe to do because it forms those flower buds that are desirable later in the year.
When I'm pruning my other trees and stuff.
Yeah. When you're
I'm
pruning all
looking out
your other
my
stuff.
office window right now, and there's a giant butterfly bush, and butterfly bushes are very forgiving if you're going to prune one of those. But that's a good example of a dormant
Or your
The
native
abelias
hydrangeas.
Yep.
Yeah, Rose of Sharon. We mentioned that one. It's a late bloomer.
Yeah.
What about wisteria? Where does that fit?
Wisteria is more of a vining.
It's a vine. If it's the Asian wisteria, which is the
I have to look up
most pretty one, you should chop it any and every time because it is so aggressive. It's actually
It'll take over.
It'll take over everything. So it's just kind of like prune it always. If it's the American native one, I think you would prune that after bloom.
I would think so. It prunes early enough.
It's an early bloomer. Yeah.
It's like I think of it as June.
We've had this conversation today, and Brett's kind of wrapping us up here, but we've not mentioned the number one rule and number one pet peeve of pruning. Nobody's mentioned that today. I'm shocked.
Oh, what, topping?
Yes.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you. Yeah.
Well,
We
we
have
kinda hit
not
it with
even gotten
I think
we
of
kinda
that
hit
as
it with
more
the
of
hedge
like a
trimmers,
war
but
crime than
yeah.
True, Brad. That's fair. That's
Yeah.
fair.
I do. It makes me like I can't stand it. I can't stand when like my neighbors or other people top their trees
And
and
that's
then
just
they look
indiscriminately
terrible.
They
shearing,
look,
yeah.
they're just like little club
And
trees
I'm
with like
just
little
like,
sprouts coming out the top, and you see a
oh.
poor red bud that's been, oh my gosh, it's so painful.
And I just like don't like we preach it and preach it and preach it, but then there's still
Well, a lot of the utility companies still do it too. Yeah.
companies that still
So
do it
bad.
as part of their general practice, like
Yeah.
gigantic maple
Yeah.
trees
Yeah.
that are just have
Ugh.
itty bitty sticks for
So
their
a couple things are happening there. Yeah, maples are going to send out new growth because they sent that signal that something
they're
terrible is
dying.
happening to me. So they send out a lot of soft, rapid growth that's going to get a lot of wind damage, a lot of sun scald. And you're ignoring that rule we talked about earlier, which is always prune to a living point, which is a bud or
Yeah.
back to
You're basically
a
using
bigger
a
trunk.
giant hedge trimmer when you top things. Like
Yeah,
Yet
it's
again,
indiscriminate.
you need to have a license in order to even have those.
Thank you,
these
Brett.
people have
Thank you.
license.
Thank
Well,
you.
they
Yeah.
don't have arborist license usually.
Some of
Yeah.
some of them do.
I like the
Um,
pruning
Some of them just have
discussion.
chainsaw.
I
Ray,
like
can
the pruning
you
discussion.
put a link? We have a great pub on like why not to and how to get a not top your trees. If you'll put a link to that in the show
Sure.
notes,
And
and then
so topping your trees, in case anyone doesn't,
yes, sorry,
exactly like Alexis said,
I
it's
cut
like
them off.
coming and just cutting the top, like
Indiscriminate.
taking a spot on the tree and just cutting everything
Yeah.
above that spot on all the branches off.
Right.
And you have
No.
a tremendous amount of dead snags because since you're not pruning to living points intentionally, it's going to die back to a living point. I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
or worse.
And
So
And there
lots
are
of
things
damage.
you can, if it's too tall or it's too big, you can actually you can thin the leaders. You can do these
Yeah.
other things that are
Heading back
much
and thinning
more.
cuts. Yeah.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
in my experience, that's a lot of people get worried about trees being, like you said, too big and
Mhm.
scared. And that's a better price when they
Yeah.
hire certain companies to get them
Yeah.
topped. But in the long run, that tree is
Yeah.
probably going to become. It's going to be more dangerous
Yeah.
than it
It's
was.
gonna be ugly, or it's gonna die, and you're not
It's
gonna want it anymore.
You're gonna
Probably both.
have more
Probably both.
issues with that tree by
Yeah.
thinking that you're doing something good and making
Mhm.
it safer when you're actually doing
So really, you're
adverse.
gonna pay for them to come out
Yeah.
twice within
Yep.
probably a 10-year period.
Yep.
And maybe wants to pull it off your house.
Yep.
And that's a tough discussion. I know, it bothers all of us plant nerds, but that's a tough discussion when you're working with a homeowner and they love a tree, but it was the wrong tree for the wrong. It was
Right.
a tree for the wrong location, and they're trying to make the best of a bad situation. But I feel like they're always just kicking the can down the road. They're deferring the problems another year when
Mhm.
really once you top a tree, you have in every situation, limited the useful life of that plant. You have reduced the life of that plant. You're just deferring the problems.
Yeah, as insane as it is, I would rather you cut the tree down than do that to it
Yes,
if it's not in the right
it's gonna
spot.
be cheaper.
And probably safer because, as you
Yeah.
guys mentioned, it structurally is not good. So there's a lot of reasons not to do that. But I was impressed with us today. We waited the whole episode and did not get on this tangent. So good on us.
We just assume everybody listening to this knows how bad topping is, and we were like, we don't even need to say it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have been in your ears long enough today, so we will get out of here. But we will put some links in the show notes that maybe will be helpful for you. Of course, drop us a line via email, also in the show notes. You can follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast. Also in the show notes. And, if you've got questions, if you want to tell us about your favorite snack, maybe we should do something on our Instagram story about, what is your favorite walking snack, and have you tried artificial crab meat as a walking
What's
snack?
As a
the
portable
process?
snack.
Like, is there a video of how they create that crab meat?
There probably is, and you probably don't want to
Do you
know.
want to watch the video of how they make chicken nuggets? No. So I
No.
don't
Or
want to watch
Vienna
the
sausages. I mean, I'm
imitation
just
crab
saying.
meat or Vienna sausages. Yeah,
No.
exactly. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys. We appreciate you guys being here, not just me. And we hope that you will join us next time. Have a great one.